Hello, and welcome to Point of View, where we give students the opportunity to listen, learn, and lean in. I'm your host, Emerson, and today we'll be discussing education across the globe.
Thank you, Ms. Pope, for being on Point of View first and foremost and taking time out of your day to have a small little interview with me. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, your childhood, and where you're from?
Okay, so I'm originally from South Africa. Grew up in just outside of Johannesburg, about 20 minutes outside of Johannesburg, on I guess like a small farm. We called it a small holding, sort of at 25 acres. We had horses and goats and chickens and the whole lot. Went to primary school, so we called it primary school, which would be elementary school here, which was about a 15-minute drive from where I was, and then high school was about a 40-minute drive. And then went to college, or as we call it, university. So went to Rhodes University, which is in the Eastern Cape side, and then landed up teaching for 7 years in the East London area, which was close to where Rhodes University was, and then landed up coming across here on an exchange teaching visa. Met my husband, and this is where I am, American.
Cool. So what do you think led you to pursue education?
Okay, so actually, I wanted to do, and you're going to laugh at this, journalism.
Oh.
That was my real interest, especially the writing side of it. Really wanted to get into that. I love being part of current events and being at the forefront of all of those sort of issues. But when I got to senior year, and both my mom and dad had been teachers back in the day, but my dad was now, he worked within the business world, and my mom, it jumped from one little activity to another little activity. They did different things. But I got to my senior year, my dad said, well, South Africa provided a small scholarship for people interested in becoming teachers. Not much, but just it would carry us over for like sort of, at the time I think it was 4,000 Rand a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a little. And so he said, you're going to have to go and do teaching. And, thought maybe I'd switch over to journalism, but I fell in love with teaching. So that was it.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So then, how do you think the environment teaching in South Africa, is different compared to like in the U.S.?
I think so I think in terms of South Africa, it's such a mixed experience. So we had what we called coming out of apartheid. We had 3 types of schools, like a Model A. I can't even remember what the Model A was, a Model B, a Model C school. But they had these differences. So if you landed up in a school that, because, in apartheid they segregated, and you had your black schools and your white schools. And then as I became a teacher, they started integrating the schools so that it wasn't divided along those lines. But of course, if you lived in largely a black area, it was still largely a black school, and those schools were really poor, underfunded. They didn't have generally parental support. It was all just sort of whatever government funding could come their way. Whereas I was in what we called a Model C school, and we had partly government funded, and then we were partly parent funded, and had that private funding. And so that would kind of like benefit the school in that area, in that way. So those schools largely in white areas, largely funded by wealthier parents, and then we had private schools. So it was like just sort of that division where you sort of landed.
Wow. Okay, that's something very
yeah,
interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think the students were different in things like maybe attitude, productivity, responsibility, and work ethic?
I'm going to laugh at this. Students are students right across the world. Like you sort of think like they're going to be vastly different, but I mean, these are teenagers with the same kind of interests and so on. I think the difference lies in, when you were in this Johns Creek bubble, you're often isolated, but you're sort of protected, especially by your parents who are often educated themselves, who are very driven to get you to do well. Whereas if you come sort of from a poorer background, you often land up having to do work for your parents, or you get home and you don't have time for homework because you're having to kind of support the family. Because I remember one situation where we used to have, so in South Africa, we wore school uniforms. so very different here. So we wore school uniforms, and but we would have what we called Civvies Day, and students could pay 5 rand at the time and wear casual clothes. So that was a big day. And I remember going, the one day one of my students was still wearing his uniform, and I was saying to him, well, why don't you take part in Civvies Day? And he's like, he doesn't have the money, and that was the smartest outfit he had, was his school uniform. I know. And I mean, he would wear that to church. I know. So there was that distinction between sort of real poverty and then the mix of wealth that we had at the school. Yeah.
Okay. And what about the curriculum? How was that different? What did you teach?
I taught, oh my gosh. I taught English and history. By my, we got into sort of my 5th year, I think, where I was at a school called Sterling High School, and they needed a biology teacher, and I'd done biology at college 1 year. 1 year of biology at college, and they were just desperate, and so I stepped in and landed up teaching junior and senior biology. Wow. And in the end, loved it, but that was a learning curve for me. And then English and history were my main subjects as well. But another thing that was sort of different in South Africa was every student was expected to play sport after school. So it wasn't like us where you could choose and to be part of a team. And also coaches were the teachers at the school. So all of us were involved in some sort of coaching. So I mean, let's see, school would start at like 7:30, so it was pretty early, but we'd end by 2:30. Actually, I felt like we ended by 2 because by 2:30 we were on the sports field, coaching one of the sports, and we had field hockey and rugby. And I mean, here you have your varsity soccer team. Yeah. We had the first team, which was obviously the varsity team, but then we would have the second team, the third team, we would have the under 14 level, but under 14A, under 14B, under 14C, under 14D. So everyone played, and we would travel to different schools, and all these schools had teams. Really gave everyone the opportunity to be involved.
Did you coach?
Yeah. Yes, I coached the first team hockey, the under 14A team hockey, and then I also got involved in water polo. So that, I know that's not a sport here, not big here. I think it just depends where you go in America, but it's huge in South Africa. And so, coach the water polo team as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so was teaching in South Africa like flexible? I know compared to here, you're more on a strict like curriculum. You have to teach this, cover this. What limitations did you have, and what freedom did you have?
Okay. Oh, that's a great question. I think the only limitations we had really was by working together with other teachers, although we were still kind of free to kind of do what we wanted to do. But as like an English department, we divided the year into 4 spaces. So we had to do a play, we had to do a fiction, we did a movie. So we had a film unit embedded in there, which was always fun, and then I guess a non-fiction unit. So it was divided in 4 like that, and you would obviously cover a huge amount of texts within that. But and we would sort of agree more because America has access to resources. I mean, when I started, we had one computer in the whole building. One. And so you would like maybe go check your email like once a month. I mean, this is 50 teachers sharing one computer. Students didn't have computers. When I started, we still had blackboards. Then we went to the whiteboard, and then, and the blackboard, they have the overhead projectors. I don't think you guys even know what those are. A lot of change. And I think resources make a difference, whereas we didn't have that access to resources. So if we were saying we had to teach according to the books we had and access that we had. But I taught To Kill a Mockingbird, Of Mice and Men. So these books that you're familiar with here, we were teaching there in South Africa. And of course, Shakespeare was huge.
Okay, what about, can you share a memorable teaching experience from your time in South Africa?
Yeah, I think as a white teacher, I always believed that and wanted to believe that I supported the struggles of Black teachers and of Black struggling schools and of Black students. Wanted to show we were always on their side. There was a lot of Black students, Black teachers especially, going on strike at times and stuff. And we would be like, as white teachers, we'd be like, we can't take that time out of school. That's not a good thing. But, we totally support you. We totally support you. And then I'll never forget, I was teaching a poem. And in the poem, there was the word scab. What does it mean to be a scab? And so we got talking about it. And the whole idea of a scab is that if you don't side with the union and side with the people on strike, you're seen as a scab, that you're kind of going against what the change that these people are trying to bring to an organization or whatever it is. And so I'm teaching this, and one of the students, one of my Black students from the back of the class said, "You're a scab." And I remember looking and going, "What?" And then it's sinking in that, as white teachers, we're insupportable, but we wouldn't really take a stand, and wouldn't really support. And I came over here in 2003, and I think it was about maybe 2008, maybe even 2010, I can't remember exactly, was the first time white teachers stood with Black teachers. And that's how much change has had to take place in their thinking and stand by and make a difference. Yeah.
Okay,
so
awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was really powerful. That was good. I love that. Okay, and last question.
Yeah.
How can you tie up all of this together? How did you end up coming here to Northview?
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about like international teacher exchange.
Yeah.
How did that work, and how long have you been here?
Okay, so I'm not sure if everybody has a sort of experience, but I seem to live my life by 7-year waves. And I've been at my 7th year at Sterling High School, and I needed a change in my life. And I was paging through the newspaper and I came across this ad that says, "Come teach in America, we'll pay for your flights." And I was like, it was a 3-year J1 visa program. I was like, I'm never going to be able to pay for flights to America. Like, what an opportunity. So I put in my application on the one computer that existed in school. Like, 2 months later, checked, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to be there interviewing in South Africa. Can you meet us for breakfast on this day for an interview?" It's like, oh my gosh. So it was like the weekend, turn around, met with them. That changed my life. I came across to Orchard Mill Middle School, taught for 7 years at Orchard Mill Middle School. I met my husband sort of within a year of being here. My poor mom, she was like, don't go and fall in love. Fell in love. But was 7 years at Orchard Mill Middle School, and then I wanted to be back at high school. And a spot opened up here at Northview right towards the end of the year. Like Johns Creek had just opened, and there were teachers leaving here to go into Johns Creek, and a spot opened here because what an opportunity. And now I've been more than 7 years, and this is my home. I'm not leaving. Northview is a great place to be.
What year did you come to Northview?
2011.
Okay.
Yeah. So
awesome.
I've been here a while.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, that's it for the interview questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh my gosh, thank
and
you,
also
Zara.
for educating our listeners on like your different travels and South Africa and so much different things that people might not know.
Yeah.
And it's good to spread awareness about, the privilege that we have here, obviously, and other places in the world that might be not as privileged or maybe are, but it's just an awesome way to learn.
Yep, I love it, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other teachers who also bring this international experience.
Thank you
all
so
right,
much.
oh, this is so cool. Congrats on this.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your childhood, and maybe a little bit, whatever you want to tell us?
So, hi, my name is Arslan. I grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, tiniest country, maybe one of the tiniest countries in the world and the Middle East. Beautiful country with a lot of nice mountains and beautiful beaches. I went to an American international school, the biggest in the Middle East, that is close to the American University of Beirut. I was French section. I grew up speaking French and Arabic. Started learning English in 6th grade, and then I did my French back before coming to the US.
Okay, so what did you study in college? Did you originally study education, or how did you get into education?
That's a good question, because actually I studied broadcast journalism and I interned at CNN, but then I decided I wanted to be a teacher because of all the fun things about it, creativity, and because I love languages and I wanted to transmit this love of languages to my students, to other people. So I did my teaching certification after doing my broadcast journalism degree at Georgia State in both French and Spanish. I had to study Spanish because Spanish was my fourth language.
Okay, so did you originally start teaching here in America, or where did you start teaching?
Yes, I started teaching here in the US at a private school in Roswell. I was there for a couple of years. And then I moved to Saudi Arabia with my family, where I taught ESOL at the American International School. It gave me a broader experience, very international. I taught students from all over the world there. And then I moved back to River Trail and then here at Northview now.
Wow, what a journey. Okay, so how do you think the environment was different there compared to American schools?
Well, I think it's the same curriculum. They follow the American curriculum. It's just the students were also very international from various countries of Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and American students, few. It was different because you get to live an expat life. You know, you're not local, very international school. Lots of different exposures. We traveled a lot for conferences. The school would send you to conferences in Dubai, Bangkok, Istanbul, so it was a broader experience. I loved it.
It's very nice. And what about the students? How were the students different, maybe compared to things like here in America, maybe like attitude, productivity, even like responsibility?
Well, because I taught ESOL, so I had students sometimes with very limited English or no English coming from various countries, whereas here most students are fluent. So these students were usually they're fluent in their native language and English was their second language. I feel like here students are more athletic. There's more focus on athletic activities. But again, because it was an international American school, so the difference was not that huge, and it was a high school. Yeah.
Okay, and what about like teaching wise? Was it flexible? Like I know you said you taught ESOL. What limitations did you have? Were you able to just teach off like a curriculum, or were you able to create more activities yourself?
Right, yes. So of course resources were more limited than what we have in the US, because we were exporting everything from the US. We would get online to get a lot of resources. We would wait for the shipments. The curriculum also was sometimes, we had to work on it. We did work on a curriculum, and I did implement the high school ESOL curriculum for the school.
Nice. Okay, and what about, can you share like a memorable teaching experience from maybe the time that you were there?
I had so many, but I think the nicest ones were when they had the international festivals. They were huge, big, hosting countries from all over the world. But the main thing I think is the connection that we make, because we all lived as expats. Mainly we lived on the same compound, we lived in the same, we had the same school. So the communities were very close to each other. I still have students in Korea that message me, in Spain, and colleagues all over the world. So it's just it's a broader experience than just Johns Creek.
Yeah. Even though Johns Creek is a very diverse area.
It is.
But it's nothing like leaving
Exactly,
this bubble. And then
Yes, but this is a very diverse community, which I love, yeah.
So what are some aspects of like the international experiences do you incorporate today at Northview? I know you taught ESL, and maybe you learned, you already knew French, but what about now? Like, what do you do here at Northview that you kind of incorporate?
Yeah, so I feel like there was more flexibility at the other school, but here, because you have to follow the Fulton County curriculum and Fulton County and the PLCs and all that. So, and students here, I feel like the language I'm teaching now, French or Spanish, it's their second, or for some students, it's their third. Whereas what I was teaching ESL, English, it was their second language. And we would work more on academics, so I would push in with those students to work with them in classes on like social studies, science, help them understanding the content.
Yeah.
So that's a difference.
And what do you think? Do you like teaching languages here or in your American international school?
There are some things that I like here and some things that I like there. I think what I like there is that they used to send us to amazing conferences, and I like the community because there were students coming from all over the world for the first time to an American school. So I like that. So you see the authenticity in them. And I like the community at Northview, and I like how students are very driven. And very committed to what they're doing.
Awesome. Okay, and then last question is, we briefly touched on this earlier, but how did you ultimately come back to America and start teaching at River Trail again? Was that just spontaneous? Or?
No, we left our house here. We lived here for years. We left. We're American citizen. We left it here, and we knew we were gonna come back. I came back for my kids' education. Once my oldest, got to upper middle school, we knew that we were gonna come back.
Awesome, and that's it for the interview questions. Thank you so much for your time and also for educating us, because it's a lot of teachers are they've only taught here, and a lot of students don't know what education is like around the world. So that's awesome that you gave our listeners an experience and insight into
Thanks. And I want to add, because I did the French bac, so I understand, I also went to French school. When I was young, I lived a year in France. So I understand the French system, the American system, and the local Lebanese one.
Very awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
college educated, and so they had in their minds that I would stay in Atlanta and go to either Spelman or Clark.
Right.
I didn't want to do that because I wanted to leave Atlanta. That landed me at Auburn.
Okay.
So when I got to Auburn, I was like, I'm going to either do medicine or law.
Right.
Those were my two.
Those are the
things.
two. Right.
Yes. Medicine didn't work out. I was biomedical sciences for my undergrad. Realized I was not cut out for
Yeah.
And I had what I needed to have in high school. I was part of HOSA. We did HOSA competition.
Right.
My degree or my diploma is dual, so I have my college and career prep, and then my tech because I was medical bound.
Right.
Once I got to Auburn, that didn't work out, and so I changed my major to English because law was the second option.
Right.
And that was fine. I graduated. Then I started practicing for the LSAT.
Right.
And that's when I was like, might not be for me either.
Right. And you have a degree at this point, you said?
I do.
Okay.
Yes. So I've graduated with my BA at this point in English. And I had everything kind of in place of what I needed to have to go to law school. I had like work out, and then that's when I was like, okay, well, what other options can someone with an English degree
Right, and then I guess teaching is like right there.
Yes. But I didn't have education credits.
Okay.
So that was my next goal.
Okay. And then, so you get your degree as an educator now, right? Do you immediately teach? So, well, for one, you taught abroad, right? You taught abroad. Where did you teach abroad?
I taught in China.
Okay.
China.
So, how did that come to be? Like, did that happen right out of school?
No.
Okay.
So education, post-baccalaureate takes a good 2 years.
Okay.
For me, I did a year,
Mm-hmm.
and then I became a paraprofessional at an elementary school in Cobb County.
Okay.
That was Title I funded, so I knew that was going to be indated.
Mhm.
Once the school year is over, then that was going to be it.
Right. And indated means?
Indated means that once the school year is over, that job is gone.
Okay, right. So you have that set start and beginning.
Yes.
Start and end.
So I started spring term, which when we came back from winter break, that was early January.
Right.
And school during that time was still getting out. I think maybe like a week before Memorial Day weekend. And I was like, well, what other options do I have that don't require me to do a lot right now, like during the summer? So I just started applying randomly. Inadvertently applied to a school that said Atlanta. It was not.
It was not?
It was not.
Where?
And that was fine. It was China.
Oh! Wait. So you ended up teaching at
I
China.
don't think I've ever told anybody that.
So you
ever.
applied at a school?
Yes. The school is, I guess because it's international.
Right.
They have satellite.
Oh.
I don't think it's called that anymore.
But like
at the
remote?
time, no, it was satellite.
Okay.
Which was different in 2013.
Okay.
That looks different than what it looks like now.
Okay.
So not quite remote. Satellite, and I guess the best way to explain it is like you had access to it in some way.
Okay.
Kind of like during COVID, where kids were at home learning and we were physically in the building teaching. That's more satellite. That's not really
Gotcha.
remote.
It's not quite like okay.
Right.
More
So
like a Teams meeting rather than
yes,
a Canvas assignment.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So I applied. It said Atlanta. I was like, okay, cool. And then I had the interview, and they were like, okay, we'll do it because of the time difference. And that should have been my red flag.
Right, like time
Like
difference.
time difference, there isn't one.
Right.
And they were like, we can do it this time. It'll
Right.
be this time.
But sometimes
for
it just
you.
gets swept under the rug when you're
Yes,
just like, oh, I have a
yes.
job now. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's what ended up happening.
Okay.
I had the interview. They maybe called back 3 days later, 2
Right.
or 3 days later, and was like, we want to offer you the job.
Mm-hmm.
It's in China. And I was like,
Did you know any Chinese? Did you?
no.
Okay, well, I guess this segues perfectly into what is it like, I guess. So, like, how is that environment different? Especially not. So, how is that not knowing Chinese when you're.
The good thing about teaching language, you don't need to know
Right.
the home language
Right.
to teach the target language.
Right.
I think that's what saved me.
Right.
And even still.
Like,
I
you're not
think
teaching literature, you're teaching English.
Right.
Okay.
Right. There are some literary elements, but
Right.
primarily you're just teaching them.
Like, words
Yes.
and. Okay.
And when I say that, I think once we kind of segue into how the curriculum compares to that, if we get to that, then it's more of, it's not as cut and dry as I think it is here.
Okay.
And so with international schools, you tend to focus on language across the board. So for every core subject you have that language piece. And it's because you're teaching in a space where there are not always people enrolling in the school who have English as a language at all.
Right.
They push for kids like that when it comes to enrollment at international schools. But these are diplomats, or kids of diplomats. These are kids of high-profile people within the country.
So, like, this isn't like some public school. This is a
Exactly,
fancier.
exactly.
Okay. So, I guess. Oh, no.
Public school looks a little bit different in China. I taught in international school. I didn't teach at a public school.
Right.
And public school, again, is not as cut and dry as it is here. You have state schools.
Right.
And you have to test into those state
Right,
schools.
I've heard. So, was that experience teaching at a? Would you say that there are more parallels, you think, at an international to the, like Northview per se, than it would have been at a public school, or is that
Yes.
just okay? So, I guess this is an interesting question, given that it's high-profile people. How are the students different? Were they?
A little bit highfalutin.
Ah.
I can say that.
Yeah, I think you can. So, specifically for like academic, how are they like academically, like attitude, productivity, responsibility, any of that?
I think North U is a very good example of
Right.
what that looks like academically.
Right.
I will use math as an example because
Okay.
I think that that's very black and white.
Right.
If a kid is learning math, they are learning one or two ways of how to solve that problem.
Right.
They need to use those one or two ways to solve that problem
Right.
forever and always.
Right.
Here, we have a little bit more flexibility. And here, I mean, in U.S. schools, we have a little bit more flexibility in letting the learner figure
Right.
out the best way it is for them
It's
to
not
get
this
to,
is your answer. If
Yes.
theoretically they like a kid comes to their own solution, that isn't not maybe encouraged or
right.
okay,
Yeah.
and where it's not.
Right.
Okay.
And sometimes that can be to a disadvantage.
Right.
Language, literature, science, all of it kind of works in a situation of we don't introduce exceptions because in our worlds, they don't exist.
Right.
So when we're teaching language, when you're teaching literature, you're teaching it exactly how the curriculum wants it to be
Right.
taught. That's it.
Which seems like it could arise. Some issues could arise out of that.
Yes, for someone who
Right.
grew up in U.S. schools.
Ah.
And this is more of the U.S. has its own little worlds of teaching.
Right.
The rest of the world typically follows the CEFR, which is like the Common European Framework.
Okay.
That took me a minute to learn.
Right.
It's a learning curve because there's some language rules, some grammar rules that we are taught and that we teach as teachers even now that don't exist anywhere
Right.
else. So I had to lean into the rules of how they speak with British English, how they speak in the international English.
Right. You're not teaching American
I'm
English.
not teaching American English.
Okay.
And so with that, the kids had to find a way to navigate that because yes, a parent can pick who they want to teach their kids. It's not like here where the kid can request courses, they'll get a schedule, and then we kind of figure it out from there if there are issues. The parents are involved every step of the way.
Okay.
Which is very interesting and not in a bad or good way.
No, it's just different.
It's just different.
Okay. Well, did you have any limitations? Was like China flexible? Were there limitations? What was it like?
The school was not flexible.
The school, okay.
And there are a couple of stories I can share with that if we can talk about that.
Right.
The living in China, I think, gave me a different perspective and quality of life.
Okay.
It is a second world country.
Okay.
Which living in a first world country, you don't have as many things as you would like in terms of access.
Right.
But you have some things that you don't have access to in the U.S. that I had in China.
Right.
Healthcare is one thing. Someone who, I think when I moved there, I was 25 or 26 or something
Around
like
there.
that. Yeah. Maybe a little bit younger, but no less than 24 years. So I was still under my mom's insurance.
Right.
Typically that carries with you when you go to another country if you're traveling. I was living there, so that looks a little bit different.
Right.
There is socialized healthcare, and so there are pharmacies everywhere. If you've ever been to Europe, you see those pharmacies all on the road. Anybody can access them. The difference with the pharmacies in Europe and the ones in China in comparison to what we have here, in Europe and the US, you need prescriptions at some point. In China, you just walk in and get whatever you need. So
Like you can just ask for.
just ask for whatever you need. So if you need amoxicillin because you have strep throat, go in and ask for amoxicillin. No questions asked, pay the money.
Wow.
If you know that you have a virus and you need a Z-Pack, I think, you can walk in and get a Z-Pack. Things that we have over the counter here are over the counter there, but you have prescription meds.
It's all over the counter.
All
there.
over the counter.
Wow, that is interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, that's just one example of how it looks if we're thinking about second world countries, which I don't think many people are cognizant of.
Right. It's like
They either
in most
first
people's
world
mind,
or
exactly.
third
It's just
world.
first and third,
Yes,
and then.
yes. But China's a second world country, so you have limited access in some way. So like social media,
Right.
Google was something that was blocked,
Right.
and I watched it be blocked while I was there because Google did a Tiananmen Square tribute. Yes. And I was on it because I was in grad school at the time working on my master's at USC in California. was doing some work, emailing my group members, and I had no access. As I'm typing this
Right.
out, access is shut down.
Wow.
So everything is censored.
Right.
Everything is monitored. And that's okay to a certain extent.
Right.
Train rides, if you've ever ridden MARTA, you can hear certain things happening. They don't have TVs on our MARTA trains here and buses. But in some other cities in the U.S., you'll see like TVs or whatever on board, and you can watch like CNN or whatever.
Right.
Whatever is playing on the TVs on the metro in China, it's all CCTV. Everything is government
It's
pushed
just-
out.
Okay.
Which again is not inherently bad.
It's just different.
just different. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned this before, and I'd like to circle back to it. Do you want to share like a memorable teaching experience from? Are there any really? Is there anything that stands out?
I will say the way that teachers are regarded in China was interesting. Not everyone, teachers are respected
Right.
more than they are here.
Oh, okay.
However, there are some instances where you learn that respect is very fluid there.
How so?
In the sense that I observed kids not necessarily respecting their parents. And I think that the line was very thin in the transference of respect from parents to teachers.
Okay.
The profession of teachers is respected.
Right.
The physical adult is not.
I feel like it's different here almost. Not people respect teachers, but people don't, maybe profession is like how's
Right. So if we were just a figurehead of a title,
Right.
I don't think that there would be any question about the level of respect that teachers have in China.
Right. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Right.
You go out on the street, you talk to people on the train, they'll ask you what you do for a living, they hear teacher and they
like,
whoa, bow,
right,
praise
right.
you, things like that.
Not quite the same.
Not quite the same here. But there was an instance where our school was getting prepared for Halloween, and I'm like, I'll celebrate holidays, but it's not something that I go all out
Right.
doing. But this school, because it was international, it was trying to encompass any kind of holiday that anyone in the Western world would celebrate. And so we were getting dressed up. Like I had on like a witch's hat and something else, and we're walking through the school. The lights are off, by the way, in the school. You have like skylights, but that's not giving you more than like a moon glow.
Right.
And then we had like little soft lights, whatever. We're walking through, I'm walking through, past all the classrooms, and this little kid, because it's all grade levels within the school.
Like K through 12 or
Yes.
Okay.
So within an international school, it's like that. In a state school, it's more confined.
Okay.
But there was a kid, and he was running through, and I was like, hey, let's stop running. This is, you might find it funny, I don't know. I thought it was very interesting because I had to figure out how to move next.
Right.
I was like, hey, let's stop running. We don't want to hurt ourselves. And I was at his level because that's just one of those things. You don't tower over a kid.
Yeah.
He's like 6.
Right. You gotta go like on that level.
So I get down on his level. He slaps me.
Oh.
Yes. He slapped me, flat palm right across the face. And I was like, reflex, because we all have reflexes. Reflex was like literally I had to stop my hand.
From retaliating.
Yes.
As
because
is fair,
I
it's
wasn't
just like
protected.
you got hit. The default response is
Yes. And I wasn't even thinking kid. I was thinking I've just got hit. I need to protect my space.
right.
And then I had to.
Right. That didn't go through. Thankfully, you did not slap a 6-year-old.
No, I did not. And I was like, stop running. Bent over. He slapped me, and I looked at him, and I was like, don't you ever in your life hit me or anyone else.
Right.
And he looked at me. He just started screaming, and then he ran off. So that was a memorable story
Right.
because I can still feel the slap.
Right.
Like the Will Smith and Chris Rock taking the slap heard across the world. It was one of those. But then I noticed that this was a trend, not with teachers, with adults, with parents.
Right.
Moms, grandmothers, whatever would come in and they would try and pull the kid out and try and feed them because the kid was not meant to feed themselves.
Right.
There were just little things that we are not used to here.
Right.
And that is very hard for someone who's not used to it to get adjusted to.
Right. Which this segues into another question. Were there some particular challenges? I know we've glossed over a few here, but if you could put some to words, were there any particular challenges you felt you faced, and are there ways you thought you overcame them?
I like to break it up. So living there, I felt like life was pretty easy.
Right.
There were very little things that I worried about, that I had to think about at night. When I think about work, that is what's different.
Right.
There were some days where I'm like, I'm actually ready to get on the train.
Right.
And just people watch. Like that was my way of decompressing.
Right.
And we can get into like super detail if needed, but there were 2 instances that put me off from not wanting to remain.
Right. Okay. I was like going to ask. This sounds like it was a pretty good gig, all things other than slapping kids. Like pretty sounds like it was a pretty good gig. Well, only the once. But what ultimately led you coming back to Northview?
Yeah. So there was one time I got extremely sick.
Right.
I don't know what I had. I don't know where I got it from, but I woke up one day and I felt like dead. Like I had never been that sick in my life. We do have leave the same way that we have here, but it's meant to be like a visual. Like, hey, we're giving you leave. We're giving you leave.
This is something we're
It's a
gift.
We don't want you to actually use it, but we're giving
It's like,
it.
look at that. Here's some leave we're giving you.
Yes,
Don't
keep it on the shelf.
It's like
And we got really good leave.
is it like hypothetical? Like there's good leave, but
much better than what we would get.
right. It's easy to have good leave when it's a fake number.
Yes.
Like they could give you like half the year you could be
Yes.
out. It doesn't matter if you do. So when you were out on leave.
Yes, on leave. So I woke up sick. We didn't have subs,
Okay.
which that's a very dangerous game.
Yes.
Most schools, I don't know of any school while living there that I knew of who had leave or who had building subs. So who had subs anyway.
Right.
We
So
were the subs.
if you were gone, you were gone.
We covered for each other, and that's just how it worked. We didn't mind it, but there were some days like if you wake up sick, it's not like with Northview we can just put in leave, put in for a sub, someone's gonna pick it up. This would throw off someone's entire schedule.
Right. You have it. It has impact.
Yes, it has a lot of impacts, and we work on siesta schedules. So you teach, you disappear for 2 hours, you come back, you teach some more.
Okay, as opposed to like at Northview where it's a strict all through the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's very common. Businesses do the same thing, but schools for sure. The kids are out. Even the state schools, you get those 2 hours. And again, I can share a little about like what that looks like for the kids, but for teachers, if you wake up sick, your job is to come to work sick.
Right.
There's no flexibility with that.
Right.
We had relaxation rooms. There were beds. There were things in there to make you comfortable.
So you're like you have to come in.
Yes.
We're giving you amenities, but
Yeah.
you are expected to come in no matter what.
Yes. So I went in at my normal time, and I went into one of those rooms. I reached out to the school director. I was like, hey, I don't feel good. My skin feels like it's on fire, but I'm also cold.
Right. Like
I'm gonna go lay down.
right.
My lessons are planned. I'm good to go.
You've done all your
I
stuff.
feel
Just give me my
better.
moment.
Yes. From the moment that I sat down, I went to sleep. I didn't even realize that I had gone.
You were
to
just
sleep.
exhausted.
I was just exhausted. They came in 2 hours later. They were like, "Hey, you ready to teach?" I'm like, "No, I'm not." And I wasn't even lying. So I had to get up and go to the Western Hospital. And they were like, "Can you be back in a couple hours?"
Oh, wow.
Like they truly did not care.
Right.
That was one instance. The second instance, my grandmother passed away while I was there, and we get bereavement. So you can use that. You can use that.
Yeah. Once again,
Um,
is it like another thing on the shelf?
Yes, they don't want you to actually use it, but it's there. I had to actually use it.
Right.
And it was like the standard 3 days. I think bereavement is typical globally,
Okay.
3 days. And I was like, hey, my grandmother passed away. You guys know that I live in the U.S.
Right.
I'm going to have to travel to make it back.
Right.
That's going to eat up all of my 3 days of bereavement simply for traveling.
You go in, you go out, and then
Yes.
those are the days.
Yes. She died, or her funeral was on a Friday.
Okay.
They wanted me to be back Saturday. So kids are in school 6 days a week.
Okay. I was like, okay, well, that seems manageable, but if you're going in on
because it takes 24 hours.
right. Oh goodness.
Yeah. So my flight left at a decent time to where it was still the previous day. So I think I left Wednesday. It was still Tuesday.
Right.
That would have given me enough time. So I went off because it was disrespectful, not just for sympathy of someone losing a family member, but it was the inflexibility of knowing that I have this leave, that I've not touched it, that we know what it's there for, and you not wanting to allow me to.
Right. Just disregard is what it is.
Disregard. I yelled at them so bad they didn't even charge my leave. They let me keep it.
Wait, they charge you on?
Well, just
You kept those days.
Yeah, so I fussed them out so bad. They was like, nope.
And then was that kind of maybe I take my foot up and maybe look at better options for the pastors?
I'd already signed my second year contract when she died.
Okay.
I came back. She died in October of 2014. Came back and I was like, I think this was just a moment.
Right.
We can work through this.
Yeah, everything has moments.
Yes. But then I started observing things that were happening to other teachers in the building.
Right. Like the honeymoon period, you were noticing like,
And at this point I had been there for a little over a year.
Right.
So there are no penalties like there are here with contracts.
Right.
Fulton County has penalties. So if I were to break my contract, I would have to pay.
Okay.
That's not really a thing in China. If you change your mind, you just change your mind. You just sign like an addendum and they put it in your file. So I let December come, and I was like, I don't think that this is the right fit right now, and I don't know that this is the right place for me to be in terms of the country itself. I was like, I don't have anything against living here, but I think that right now y'all have put such a sour taste in my mouth that I just want to leave.
Right. I don't blame you.
Yeah. So they were like, oh, okay, it's no big deal. We'll make sure we process everything through HR. And I had my exit interview. So I don't think I mentioned this. When you move to a country like China, you have an entrance interview and an exit interview.
Right.
And then wherever you move to within the country or within what city you're living in, you have to register with the police.
Okay.
And every time you register with the police, you have an interview. And it's very, like, those interviews are not as long as, like, your entrance and your exit interviews. But this was not for my job. This was literally for them to allow me to leave the country.
Right. You can't just get in a car, go to an airport. I'm going.
Right. You have to get permission. And that's fine. You get permission to live there. You get permission to leave.
Which is a different culture.
Yes. And I was fine with that because there was nothing that would stop me from being denied entry should I return.
You get it all sorted out and then you're good.
Yeah. So they gave me HR push out a contract for me to leave like within 3 or 4 days of me saying I don't want to be here anymore. And that's what brought me back here, kind of. I moved back here in 2015, like back to Georgia. And I was just working jobs. I worked at a daycare. I hated that. That's not for me.
Right.
My ministry. But then my brother's godbrother called me and he was like, hey, we just got a bunch of new immigrants coming into DC.
Okay.
Apply for teaching jobs.
Because you have that experience.
Because I have that experience. And literally the turnaround was boom, boom, boom.
Like you're in.
I'm in. So I did that. Applied to Prince George's County Public Schools, which is like one of the one of the bigger districts on the East Coast.
Okay.
And when I say East Coast, I mean like the southern East Coast.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
so
below like.
So it's below. So it was Maryland.
Maryland. Okay.
Yeah,
So that area.
DC
okay.
To Maryland. Yeah. And that I loved that. I loved being up there. I still communicate with the people up there. That was my space.
Right.
I was up in the DMV for 6 years and came back down here in 2021.
Okay. And why'd you come back down here?
Health. So I have a tumor in my eye.
Okay.
And I needed to be closer to home in the event that things change. I had friends up there. One of my friends was like my emergency contact, but my closest family was in New York.
Right.
So I needed to move back down here where my mom is. Like I needed to be.
Just in case?
Yes.
Right.
And so that's what brought me back down here. And I only applied to Fulton County.
Okay.
I didn't apply to any other school district because I was like, I've always had it to where once I decided I wanted to be a teacher, I knew in my heart that I wanted to always come back and teach in the county that molded me.
That's kind of cute. Yeah.
And so I only applied to Fulton.
And then now you're here. Yeah. Well, that was it for our interview questions. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here and educating us about different educational travels. It was a really interesting story.
Yes.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Point of View. For more, follow us at NHS Point of View on Instagram. This has been your host, Emerson, and this has been Point of View.